Asian English at its wackiest. Ladies and gentlemen, our plenary speaker, Professor Stephen J. Hall.
Thank you, Nick. Let me just share what I'm going to talk about. So thank you for being part of this symposium. And we are looking at what every language teacher should know. So I'm very pleased that we started off today by looking at some important principles of how to foster language acquisition, how to nurture the learning of language. And integral to that, I consider that one of the most important areas that we are involved in is the development of questions and questioning in classrooms. Whenever we learn a new language, there are always questions. And when we're involved in conversation, there are always questions. And so questioning is one of the most widely researched areas of what happens in language teaching. So I would like to share some ideas on what every language teacher should know in relation to questioning. And in the next half an hour, what I hope to do is to revisit some important fundamental principles, because I think today we have heard some great ideas and fundamentals from my teacher, my Chegu, Paul Nation. So what I'd like to do is to contextualize some of these ideas in the fact that there is no question about to question or not to question. I had to throw a bit of Shakespeare in there somehow or other. Now, this is not a new area for education. Socrates was around a little time ago and makes the point that really, if you were not involved in the business as an educator of questioning yourselves and improving and developing, you wouldn't be here. So I am grateful you're here at our Sunway University presentation, because it shows that you are a self-questioner. And I think that's where I want to begin. As educators, really it all comes from ourselves. It all comes from ourselves. And really it's a question of looking at oneself and one's sense of identity, because it's from there that the classroom interaction will develop. And perhaps suggest some hows of questioning our own practice, reflecting on types of questions and how we organize a questioning classroom. Now, culturally, it is quite difficult in Malaysia dan sama dalam Indonesia to get our students to talk, let alone to question. So I'm going to address some of these fundamental challenges and link them to what we should know. So the important thing really is to not stop questioning, as this man has once said. And no, it's not me when I used to have lots of hair at all. I think integral then to the role of what happens in our classroom is developing a reflective approach to what we do. And on this, I draw a lot on the work of Tom Farrell and others in reflective practice. And really, I think one thing that happens is we all know that we sometimes have classes where you go, wow, that was great. And you have others where you go, oh. So it's really a question of developing an idea of looking at the problem and inquiring into our own practices, into what we do. And perhaps questioning ourselves so that we grow professionally. You know, if you become bored with what you're doing in education, it's because you're not questioning yourself. Or if I've become bored, it's when I stop saying, I can do that better. And to look at our beliefs, because these beliefs will underpin what we do in developing and facilitating learning. Notice I don't say teaching. Just to reiterate something that Paul said earlier, we've got to look at developing learning rather than being the teacher and the head at the front, and to conclude, asking questions and making sure it is not just us asking the questions, but providing an environment for learners to ask the questions. And linked to this is how we see ourselves. Face to face, you know, malu, I don't want to lose face, malu sekali. But the point is to get beyond that and provide an environment for our learners where we show that we are also not the all-knowing transmitter, and we're open to change, and we're open to using questions about ourselves as well as others. So our identity as an educator, I would contend, and you demonstrate it by being here in this wonderful symposium, our identity is one of someone who does like to reflect and to consider what's happening in the learning in our classroom. And really, sometimes we may see things that come from the ministry. You wonder, my gosh, where did they come up with that stuff? And you may see things that come from the ministry, but really, you and I know we have the power. When we close the door, we're going to do what we want anyway. In Malaysia, the record book sometimes bears resemblance to fact, sometimes. So we need to reflect and perhaps deconstruct the power status of us up the front and provide for the learning, provide for the significant input and output with our learners by deconstructing the teacher at the front role. I'm doing far too much teacher talk than I normally would if I wasn't working on a short Zoom. So I like to think about what happens on the everyday and analyze some of the things that happen in the classroom. And then also to reflect on the conditions that may shape what's going on. Harrison writes about this quite a lot in terms of self-questioning. And so perhaps we should consider some of the things we've heard today, in which you can find more about on Paul Nation's wonderful blog and on his resources, in his resources rather. So do we think about what we're doing and providing a balance in the strands of learning? Are we giving input that the learners can succeed with and then scaffold a little bit up with? Are we providing for them chances to use the language? This is where peer learning is important. This is where principals in schools have to learn that English language classrooms are noisy because learners are using language. And sometimes we will need to focus on the language as well as develop the fluency. One of the best ways for providing for space-significant repetition, for providing for development of language learning, is the role of questioning. And this has come to the attention, of course, of Ministry of Education officials in Malaysia who've got the hots about higher order thinking skills. Yeah, you know, in Malaysia, we must have an acronym, we must make it short. So one of the things about this is if we're going to develop higher order thinking skills and critical thinking, we need to consider what we are doing. And sometimes what I do in the classroom, I note down my types of questions, lower order, higher order, to see what I'm doing with the questions that I'm asking, just the amount. Because usually research suggests that basic recall questions tend to dominate in classrooms, and that higher order thinking questions tend to be less. Consider yourself. That's not to say that some closed questions are worthless, because these may provide for repetition of key target language items. And they may provide for some scaffolding of the learning, the steps up. And they may enable the learner to themselves articulate the key language idea and enable us to check. But we do need to consider the types of questions we are doing. So I now want to take onto the second part of what I said, and that I was going to look at some of the techniques. Some of our questioning can be at the language form level. Yeah, this can be looking at the words, looking at what holds a text together. And we do a lot of this, perhaps sometimes too much. So I've taken a written text example here. So I'll just let you read so you get a break from my New Zealand accent. So how a text hangs together can be really important. Conjunctions matter. I know grammar went out the door a bit here in Malaysia with communicative language teaching, but it's never gone away really. I'm now going to go through just some kind of questions which I'd like to suggest could help stimulate a bit more critical thinking. Clarification questions are also a very good strategy for everyday use in conversation. And we should, I think, make it explicit to our learners that asking questions is the norm for conversation for everyday life, and show it's something that should also be integrated into second language learning. So you might not say in everyday English language conversation, could you give us an example? But I might say, oh, I don't get that. Can you tell me more about that? Yeah. I might say, oh, it's a bit complicated. Is there another way, something else you could tell me about it? Or I'd like to hear more about that. So by asking our learners to simplify, and at the other end, to expand upon an idea, we get them to repeat the significant things we're talking about, but build on that. In fact, I did a book with some other writers for primary schools in Malaysia, where we talked about the importance of, when you're presenting language, to provide for simplification activities and expansion activities. This is important because, as you and I know, in every class is multiple levels. So by asking our learners to simplify and expand, we ask them to work with vocabulary, develop vocabulary around the main ideas. Clarifications are important. But what about thinking critically? Reason and evidence questions are also important. Now, there's a lot of research to do with this as well. Asking them, why do they think this is true? Which may require them to go and listen to something they heard earlier again, or to watch again. Asking them for why they believe something because there's something else that backs up the idea. What else do you read or hear that supports the main point? More advanced learners, is there a reason you doubt what is being said? So actually, when I work with questioning in a classroom, if I have a lesson plan and I'm teaching something new, I script in my questions. And I decide, is my question to do with the form of the language, or is my question to do with the idea and going beyond what I'm teaching? So once again, I think just to repeat myself, because repetition does matter. Different kinds of repetition. Repetition does matter, though. Am I asking them about a language form question here, or am I asking them about an idea in a content form? Yeah, am I meaning focused or form focused in my question? As language teachers, we tend to overdo form focused rather than considering relating the idea. And that is where I now turn to my next point, that it sometimes is important to personalize the language we're working with to our learners. Because personalizing the experience aids retrieval and positioning of that language inside the computer of the learner, the brain, the bit between the ears. So you just heard this, you heard this crazy talk by this crazy New Zealand guy, Stephen Hall. Where did you get that idea about what he said? To a learner. What does this mean to you personally? Does this have anything to do with your life? And do you have this idea from what you've read? Is it just from the text, or does the idea come from somewhere else? Tell your partner about that. So this is a good one with the hanging text. Yeah. And some graded readers are quite good at doing this, you know, between one chapter and another, you know, left hanging, like the TV serial, what could happen next? So getting the learners to think beyond the text. Is there an alternative to what's being suggested here? If that happened, what would come next? What would happen if this happened in the 22nd century? Huh? I'm assuming we're not all fried by then. Now, understanding a question is really half of the answer, as Socrates has said. So I want to, in the remaining couple of minutes plus, think about developing questions about the questions. So what questions does this text make me want to ask? Which questions themselves, because often we overdo reading comprehension questions, but which are hard to answer and why? And one I think is very, very important technique, especially as we spend far, far, far too much time preparing our learners for examinations. Oh, the exam, SPM, oh. Now, one of the main things is, of course, that we have a lot of teaching that relates to our learners having to pass the examination, is to get them to write their own questions from a text similar to what they may face in the examination. Because if they can write questions, they will start to understand how questions and text relate to each other. Or I've got the text. The learner, one learner already has the prepared questions, then swap, pair work again, because our learners will ask each other questions more than answering us. So, move that there. This takes me to turn to one other point here in our classrooms. Who asks the questions? It should not be just us. And then make the questions explicit in what a question does. Because one of the big things I would contend is learners want to know how to learn. They want to know what they're learning and how to learn. So Paul Nation earlier talked about the importance of strategies, strategize their learning. So we may ourselves point out to them why we ask certain questions and what these questions do, and then provide opportunities for pair work for fluency. Creating questions is also an important task. Now, what about me as a reflective practitioner? Yes, I know I have to finish off soon, but here I go. Reflection, again, the work of Sean, the work of Tom Farrell, talk about questioning on action, which is afterwards, and in action. So what do I do to look at what I'm doing with questions? I script questions. Yeah. Yes, thanks, Margaret. I notice you use clarification questions in the text. This is a welcome to Margaret Hall, a wonderful colleague, does a lot of work here. So one of the things that's important is, what do I do when I'm teaching? Well, I question my own action. First of all, I have scripted questions. I have a little notepad, and if I notice something doesn't work, I write it down. If I notice that sometimes someone will ask a question that comes from left of field, you know, apart from the questions like, Dr. Stephen, what were you doing last night? Apart from those kind of questions, one of the things I like to do is to find out, hey, that really worked. So if I've got my lesson plan there, double tick, that worked. Watch what works, but don't judge. Observe what's going on in action. Note which questions work and watch our instructions. I tend to be a bit fast with my instructions sometimes. And one of the other really important things is shocking things like this, hearing our own voice, recording oneself. Are we also actually modeling the intonation for the question? Are we making it clear to our learners that questions come in different forms? Questions come in different forms. Yeah. And are we aware of our non-verbals? For example, I know from my years in the South Pacific that I have eyebrows that go up and down all the time with questions. So the other thing is wait time. If you ask a question, enable thinking time. And this, of course, is one of the bad habits of us as motor mouth teachers, that we often don't provide the time to get the learners time to think before we look at answering questions. So note techniques that work. Think about how you're planning some repetition of key items. And ask ourselves as we teach, why did that task fall flat? Why didn't it work? And then see how we physically organize learning. So I try as much as possible when I'm face-to-face to avoid being up front all the time. Collaborative learning is so important to provide learning opportunities and safe opportunities for the output, because our learners need to use language and not go through an intensive listening period like you're doing now. And remember to work with colleagues. Have a colleague come in and see you teach to see what works and doesn't work. It makes a big difference. And it's not always, oh, I had a bad class at all. So I think we need to look at structured changes and observable behaviors. And that's why I find sometimes looking at videos of myself, and I do it quite often, it's quite frightening because I suddenly realize, oh my gosh, what a habit I have there. But it's useful because I want to model myself as a learner. And I also want to celebrate good practice when I see it with other colleagues and see things that work for myself. I scribble notes during lessons, so I continue to learn as a learner. And if the students ask me, what are you writing down there? I'm saying, well, I'm writing down something that I think worked. Why don't you do the same? And then ask yourself, what's motivating the students? Was it what's hanging them up too? Was it the language? Was it the content? Was it what I got them to do, or was it the text? And how much learning happens in a class from what's being told and what's being doing? It's the experience that matters. And what opportunities are provided for questions? And lastly, before I turn to your questions, which observables from this session could you work with? Because I hope there has been some. Right. So now what I'd like to do, having talked about questions for questioning and to question or not to question, just before I get to questions, I'd like to thank you all very, very much for being part of this symposium. And I'm so glad you're here. But now let's look at some questions I'd like to ask. Nick, do you want to curate these?
Well, we've got just the one question so far.
Okay.
We've had a lot of comments, and a lot of people agreeing with the points that you made. But we could start with this question. How could we design questions for beginning ESL learners, especially when we believe that some repetition of unfamiliar words would be a great method, not for only looking at a form-focused point of view, but more on the meaning-focused point of view?
Okay. Well, first of all, I hope that with beginning ESL learners, you're using frequent vocabulary. So once again, I'll do a plug for Paul Nation's website and look at the 1,000 word, 2,000 word, 3,000 word lists. Then you go up to the academic word lists. So designing the questions should also be designed in frequent vocabulary that's useful to them. Secondly, if you're designing questions, I think especially for beginning learners, visuals are important support for questions. And remember, if we look at language, ideas, skills, and text types. So if the language is an issue, then keep it within frequent vocabulary that's going to be of use to them. Support the language with visuals if you can. Activate their own knowledge of the particular area if the idea is weird. You know, skiing, for example, is a bit of a tricky topic to teach in the middle of Kelantan. So what are the ideas that you may need to support there? Yeah. Make the answer something which is easy for them to do. So if they are going to get malufication, they're going to be malu, you know, embarrassed to go, yeah, I don't want to answer. Then make it in a safe situation for them to answer. Sometimes I'll get the learners to come and write on the whiteboard themselves. And I tell them I'm not fussed about the spelling if they don't want to speak. Provide different ways of answering, use the important vocabulary, provide visual support. Yeah, and use the word families thing as well. That helps quite a bit. I hope that's answered you, Siabeida.
I think that question, Sian.
Yep. Okay. Yes, Julan, I use a notebook in case I forget as well. I write down what happens in a lesson because afterwards, sometimes you forget because there's so much that happens in 1 hour of teaching. If you look at the number of decisions we make, those doctors have got it easy.
We have another question here.
Yeah.
So Julia says, we may have constructed our questions before the lesson, but oftentimes students' answers will lead to additional or follow-up questions. Any tips to ensure we can, I'm guessing, answer the follow-up questions instantly?
My answer is a very simple one. Just be honest. Sometimes you might not be able to answer them. But one of the worst things we can do as educators is think we know it all. And so when I was talking earlier about modeling being a learner, that includes not being able to answer all the questions. But I will say straight up, I don't know. But I think I can find out. And now, of course, if I've got my phone there, I can always ask Auntie or Uncle Google. Yeah. you know, the famous relative who's got all the answers, or use other search engines like EcoAsia, which enables you to plant trees, plug, plug, plug. But I think the thing is, we should not avoid the weird answers in the questions that follow up, because this is showing engagement. This is showing interest. And in fact, sometimes it can go down another path that is of more interest to the class than what you've planned in your brilliance. And I think these are opportunities we should seize. Dick Allwright talks about learning opportunities. So it's go with the flow, you know? So I think sometimes if that flow comes up and it's not quite in the lesson plan, remember, you are in control of the classroom, even if the record book is there. If you deviate slightly, you are not going to get taken out and shot or questioned by the Malaysian Corruption Commission. Okay?
Hi, Professor Hall.
Hi.
Yeah, I think I would just like to share about from my experience to Julia's, I would say, question in a way that she said that how to follow up on students' questions, because yeah, I agree that we don't know everything, and I emphasized that from the very beginning of my class by setting expectations, you know, because making sure that, you know, I'm not a dictionary, I'm not a walking dictionary, and I am not I'm not Google as well. If I know everything, I wouldn't be in this classroom teaching you. I would be rich and I would be, yes, in a mansion with my cats. But yeah, so I mean, it is to get them to humanize ourselves and make sure that, you know, we are also learning. And that's why I always show my notes to my students, you know, colored notes, the words that I found, and then especially the marking scheme. And then the students would say, oh, okay, because I'm not just following a piece of paper. I do my own research. I do my own notes. Then I can show them. I say, look, I'm a teacher and I have to do this. So it's to show you that I don't know everything, you know. So when the student asks me, I would usually buy time if I know, and I would, by saying, that's a good question, I say, does anyone have any idea? That is to buy time. Or I would say, well, I would say that requires more, we need to look into it together. Let's look into it together, shall we? Instead of saying, I don't know.
Yeah, I think you hit on something that's also very important. Sometimes we don't really know what knowledge there is in our classrooms. And sometimes we can have learners there that can answer the other learner's question. And this is important to provide the space for that. So rather than even just buying time, sometimes you'll be surprised there's someone else who wants to do the see how smart I am, but they might not just want to do that. They might really know. For example, I was teaching an English for computer technology class in our wonderful ESAT program we have at Sunway. And I discovered there was a student there who was busy developing an app for a major insurance company. And I thought, hang on, what are you doing here in this degree course? And the amount of money he was earning was about 3 months of my salary for a couple of weeks' work that this student was doing. And he knew answers to the question that someone else asked that I didn't have a clue about. So sometimes we should consider really drawing on the knowledge that is already there amongst our learners. And it can be quite fantastic. And you're also showing that you are a willing listener. So active listening is also so important, right? Thank you so much for sharing that. That's great. I had to interrupt you because I'm aware now that we're chasing time a little bit. And I'll hand back to Nick. I thank you all for taking part in this session. And I'm really also appreciative for all the participants who come from outside Malaysia. We really appreciate you taking part here at our Sunway University Symposium. That's all from me now, and I'll hand you back to the MC, my colleague and friend, Dr. Nicholas Lee, and I hope you found it a useful morning session. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Stephen Hall. Thank you, everyone, for the questions and the comments and the sharing. I think the collaborativeness of this session has been amazing. Do continue to share ideas. Perhaps for future symposiums, we might have a platform for people to share ideas and support one another. But I think that's fantastic and is part of the spirit of the whole symposium, why we have the symposium in the first place. And ladies and gentlemen, we've come to an important section, a very important section of today's symposium. And I know Prof. Hall will agree with me. Prize giving. So I know that we've mentioned this a few times, and I hope you have filled up or put in your name to the form to make sure that we are able to include you in today's prize giving session. But first up, all registered participants, you are all, each and every one of you, winners today, thanks to the generosity of the University Bookstore Malaysia. And you will see more information about them and the BBC Earth magazine in the program. And there, if you were to scan this QR code, you can get your 1 month free subscription to the BBC Earth magazine. Additionally, if you go to the website, and if we could have that next slide. Yes, thank you very much. There is a place for you to key in some details, and that will take you to some additional resource, which is the CEFR linked reading and listening test. Thank you. The link is also being shared in the chat if you missed the QR code. So yes, thank you so much. So if you were to go to the website, please look for this on the page where it says kindly register here, or you can scan the QR code to register, and that should take you to these materials. So yeah, so this free digital copy of the BBC magazine is worth 39 ringgit. And everybody who's here today, you are able to get that. This carefully crafted magazine blends English and general knowledge. And there's more. After today's event, you will all receive information about a free seminar from BBC English exclusively for you as a participant and attendee to today's ESAP symposium. And all of that courtesy of University Bookstores Malaysia. So now, on to the lucky draw. So today we have 2 lucky draws, or sets of prizes from 2 different places. So the first one would be from the University Bookstores Malaysia, and the second one would be from Cambridge University Press and Assessment. So we're going to do the first lucky draw from University Bookstore Malaysia, which there will be sets of the collectors BBC magazines. Each set is worth almost 200 ringgit. And my colleagues over at marketing are about to spin the wheel. So let's see, who do we have? David Ting Jia Wan. Right, we have 1 winner. And we're going to spin the wheel again. So David, somebody from marketing will be collecting you. Oh yes, David's here. And Wan Kershin. Congratulations. And now we are going to spin the wheel for the Cambridge University Press and Assessment lucky draw prizes. Okay, I'm not sure who the winner is for this one.
Jin Jo Lan.
Okay, I think
Sorry, some technical difficulties.
apologies, everyone. Okay, we have Madhurana Vishini. Congratulations. And I think we're doing one more spin. Primalata Krishnadas. So congratulations to the winners. The team from Sunway Marketing will be in touch. We do have, so everybody who has won, you will be contacted through email. So please do check your mailbox as they will be contacting you. So moving on, we just want to say a big thank you to our speakers. Today, we have, again, Emeritus Professor Hall Nation, Professor Stephen Hall, Miss Lakshmi Priyadarshini, Miss Persis Rodriguez, Mr. Joseph Pang. Thank you again for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you. Ms. Tan Lei Hong, Mr. Rich Tolosi, Mr. Timothy Wong from Monash, Ms. Neera Dawan, Ms. Jennifer Ratabai, Ms. Farnas Yunus, Ms. Sumitra Naidu, Ms. Susila Madasami, Associate Professor Dr. Tamas Kish, all the way from Hungary. So thank you so much to our speakers who have shared lots of wonderful information with all of us. Thank you for taking the time and the effort to put together your workshops and sessions.
And thank you, Dr. Nicholas Lee.
Thank you, thank you. We would like to encourage all of you to follow our Facebook page for the Center of English Language Studies. Please do follow us to get more updates, and we will be sharing the video recordings for the workshops as well as the keynote and the plenary. So if you follow us on Facebook, you will have those updated once they are on our Facebook and YouTube page. Thank you very much for that. And yes, finally, we would really appreciate if you could help us fill up this feedback form. I know there's a lot of links, a lot of different things to fill up. But if you could, please do help us, give us some feedback. Let us know how the symposium was for you, if there are ways you think we could improve and enhance the symposium for next year. As it says here, feedback is the breakfast of champions. We do always want to improve. I heard recently that someone said that change is what keeps us the same, which I think is amazing. So we would like to change for the better, and you can help us do that by providing your feedback.
Nick, there's
Yes.
in the chat box, there's a problem filling the form for University Bookstore free sample copy. We have all your information, Riyadi, so we can look at that, yeah, and we can follow up with that one. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks for noticing that. If there are errors, please do let us know, and we will look to correct those. And in the name entry only accepts numbers on that form. Okay. Thank you, Dirk. So I think we will probably provide feedback to the people who created the form, and we will send you maybe a revised link. So also do watch out for that in your emails. Thank you so much. And with that, we have come to the end of the 14th ESAP Symposium for 2022. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for taking this time out. For those of you joining us from places where it perhaps is 6 o'clock in the morning, thank you for getting up extra early. For those of you who have gone way past lunchtime, I hope you have time to eat. For the Malaysians, selamat makan, enjoy lunch. Thank you again to everyone, and have a great rest of the weekend.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, our marketing colleagues. Thanks from Sunway University, and we look forward to seeing you next year.
Yes, we do. Thank you, thank you.
Is there a certificate?
No, we're not actually issuing a certificate. Mala, sorry. What you can do is, if you're worried, you could always do a print screen. Yeah, with your name on it. Don't forget the feedback form. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you, Naomi. So Naomi says there are e-certificates and they will be emailed to you by the end of August. Thanks, Naomi. Don't worry, Julan. We'll get you something. Thank you again, everyone. Take care.